back again to our continued series on the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham, as well as many of the acharyas who have had their pastimes there. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pacharine, Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, today I would like to discuss the life and teachings of another second-generation devotee who was instrumental in continuing the Sankirtan movement of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu pretty much just after his departure, or several decades after his departure. And that is the illustrious Rasikananda Das. He's known as the foremost disciple of Syamananda Pandit. You remember that Rasikananda is the author of the Syamananda Sataka, which we quoted a few times when speaking about Syamananda Pandit, wherein Rasikananda glorifies his spiritual master. And I chose to speak about Rasikananda today because although he may be somewhat lesser known, he's certainly not less important or less successful in his own preaching 450 years ago. And fortunately, one of his own disciples, a Gopijana Ballabha Das, wrote a biography about Rasikananda in the 17th century. And he entitled it Rasika Mangala. And it opens up, it begins with some very beautiful prayers to Rasikananda, which I would like to recite today before we move on. So his disciple writes, "The wicked age of Kali keeps one in the unlimited darkness of ignorance. The devotees who endeavor to preach are the only persons who can destroy it. Listening to the qualities of Krishna can surely help us to cross over this material world. However, listening to the glorious qualities of a pure devotee helps one cross the three phases of time, past, present, and future, and bestows upon one love of God. Give up all unnecessary occupations and listen to the qualities of Rasikananda. In this way, eliminate the misery of material existence. Rasikananda, the crest jewel of Vaishnavas, is our life and soul. Whoever develops faith in hearing his glories will quickly attain the shelter of his lotus feet. The snakes in hell, the gods in heaven, and the wise people on earth all hanker to listen to his glories." The snakes in hell, the gods in heaven, and the wise people on earth all hanker to listen to his glories. So a very beautiful glorification of his guru, Rasikananda. So our Rasikananda appeared in this world in the year 1590 in the town of Royini, R-O-Y-N-I, in southwest Bengal, exactly 56 years after Lord Caitanya had departed. And he was the son of a very powerful zamindar. A zamindar means someone who owns a lot of land, because in Vedic culture, we understood one to be wealthy depending not just on how many coins they own, but how much land and cows they have. So Rasikananda's father was a zamindar, a landowner, and his name was Achyutananda. And Rasikananda's mother was named Bhavani. And the specific reason for Rasikananda's appearance is given by our acharyas, who say that at the time of his birth, much of the population of Bengal and Orissa were engaged in sinful activities. In fact, people had lost all respect for Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. And it was common that sadhus or pilgrims were attacked and robbed on their way to holy places, like Navadvip in Bengal, or Jagannath Puri in Orissa. And because of their sinful ways, people had no interest any longer in hearing about Krishna or to speak about chanting his holy names. In fact, if people would hear a chanting party on the street, if the Vaishnavas were having Harinam, people would rush towards them and beat the kirtaniers, the singers. And I was reading that whenever people saw Vaishnavas, they accused them of being beggars, and they would throw them out of their villages into the wilderness. But in the book Rasikamangala, it's described how those Vaishnavas took all of that abuse, all that harassment. And I'll quote. The Vaishnavas were thinking as follows, quote, "O Lord, please bless these people," who are attacking them, "with a true understanding of your glories, by bestowing upon them prem bhakti, pure love for you. And we humbly request you to deliver us by sending a servant of yours into our midst, because we can no longer bear this suffering." Very humble attitude of the Vaishnavas, praying that their accusers get prem bhakti by the mercy of the Lord, but also asking for the Lord to send some special devotee into their midst, because they can no longer bear this suffering. So the acharyas say that, quote, "Lord Krishna, who is known as Bhaktivatsala, the lover of his devotees, thereby obliged their request by sending his dear devotee Rasikananda to deliver them." They go on to say, "Therefore, one should know that the town of Rohini, where Rasikananda appeared, is non-different from Navadvip, Vrindavan, Mathura, and Ayodhya. They say all the places where Lord Krishna resides are equal to Vaikuntha, and the same is true wherever his devotees reside. And the same is true wherever his devotees reside. All places where Krishna resides are equal to Vaikuntha, and the same is true wherever his devotees reside." Pretty powerful statement. So, when Rasikananda took birth, on that day that he took birth, there's a beautiful description of what he looked like. Well, first of all, it's described that as soon as he appeared from the womb of his mother, the whole entire house filled up with his effulgence. But here's a nice description of him. His moon-like face was decorated with a broad forehead. His nose looked very firm, and his eyes were like that of the leaves of a lotus. He had finely shaped ears and a head full of black curly hair, and his lips with the color of a red bimba fruit. His shoulders were like that of an elephant, and his hands were like the stalk of a lotus. His fingers were decorated with nails resembling kunda flowers, and his broad chest charmed the three worlds. This is a baby. His navel was very beautiful. The threefold curve of his waist was like that of a lion. His knees and waist were beautifully shaped like a banana tree, and the marks on his lotus feet were very charming. His nails shone brightly, and his complexion was a light bluish black. A light bluish black. In fact, if you see a painting of Rasikananda, you'll notice how he has that little tinge of bright bluish black, like Krishna. And when Rasikananda turned 6 months old, it was time for his Annaprashna ceremony. Annaprashna ceremony is when the child takes their first grains, and part of that ceremony is to put a number of items in front of the child, and then he crawls a few meters and he grabs whatever his favorite item is. And this would indicate what that child's proclivity in life would be. Now, I know in our movement in ISKCON, the parents, they observe that ceremony, and we'll put 3-4 items there, a book, a dull knife, some grains, I don't remember. But I was researching, and I found the Dasha Vidha Shamskara Vidhi. And in the Dasha Vidha Shamskara Vidhi, it's mentioned that one should put 7 items before the child at the Anaprasha ceremony. And, I'll read to you the 7 items. I wasn't aware of all of them. And you can mark them down if you have a young child who's approaching that ceremony in 6 months. So, according to the Dasha Vidya Shamskara Vidhi, the first item is the representation, like a painting of a swastika, which represents one's interest in priestly activities. Number 2 is Vedic books, like Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. You place those in front of the child, which represents one's interest in the Vedas. Number 3, gold and silver coins. If the child goes for that, that represents his interest in money and the service of Vaishnavas. Number 4, again, a dull or unsharp sword or knife, which represents one's interest in Kshatriya activities to protect Vaishnavas. Number 5, you put some grass and mud along with the other items or grains, which represents one's interest in doing service to others. And number 6, you give the child the option of choosing pencils or chalk, which represent one's interest in the arts and the skills like theater, dance, or becoming a musician. And the last is, you put a upavita, or a thread or a rope, and if the child goes for that, it represents his interest in ruling the world. We have a great leader. So I thought that was interesting. 7 particular items, and it's authorized. It's from that scripture that I quoted. So as our Rasikananda took his grains, and then his first grains, and then he was placed on the floor, and all the 7 items were put in front of him to crawl for. His mother called out, "Oh dear, Rasika, take the thing that you like the most." So hearing the words of his mother, of course he's only 6 months old, but hearing her words, Rasikananda gazed very affectionately at the Srimad Bhagavatam. And as he was gazing at the Srimad Bhagavatam, everyone saw that tears started to flow down his little cheeks, it's described. And he eagerly crawled, took the Bhagavatam, embraced it tightly to his chest, and as he continued crying, ecstatic symptoms appeared all over his body. Special boy. Then when he turned 5, it was time to begin his studies, Gurukul. So he was taken to the Gurukul, and he met his teacher. And his teacher asked him to first worship the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning. And then a famous astrologer was called. His name was Vasudev. And he helped him write his first word. And what was the first word that he wrote? Krishna. And then holding a chalk, Rasikananda himself, he wrote on the board, Shuddhir Ashtu. Shuddhir Ashtu, it means, may there be success, meaning may there be success in my education and in my studies. This is typical in Gurukuls in Vedic culture. Before the school starts, before your first lesson, you write, Shuddhir Ashtu, may there be success. Because youth is meant for learning. Then Rasikananda offered obeisances to his teacher. Now, as time went on, his teacher was astounded by his ability to learn. Not only learn, but repeat what he had learned. This is, we study, not just study, but we study to learn, to teach that knowledge to the world. So he's going through the basic education, but his teacher said one time, quote, "All glories to that mother and father who were so fortunate to have a son like Sukha and Vyas. His explanations of the Srimad Bhagavatam have opened my very eyes." This is interesting. The teacher is teaching the student, but the student, when learning, then speaks that knowledge in such a way that the teacher's eyes are opened. Oma gyantimadandasya ginangana shalakaya chukshulimilitam janatasmaya sigurave namah. I offer my obeisances to my spiritual master. I was standing in the darkness of ignorance, but he has opened my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. So here's the boy enlightening the teacher. Hare Krishna. Now we move on a couple of years. When he was around 7 or 8, his, his childhood play consisted of wandering throughout town, performing Harinam Sankirtan with his friends. Before the Harinam started, Rasikananda would write the name of Krishna on the bodies of his playmates and tell them that when we go through the town, you really have to dance a lot. But whenever the kirtan would start, it would just start, he would faint, his voice would choke up, and he would fall down on the ground and roll around, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And then the Harinam would start. And it's described that his little kirtan parties, as they moved through the town, if any of the public would, as they passed by, oh, Hare Krishna, or, sometimes when we do Harinam, people say, oh, the Hare Krishnas are here. So while they were doing kirtan through the town, if any person just uttered the name Krishna, then Rasikananda would go and take the dust of that person's feet and put it on his head. Now, it's mentioned that when he wasn't in school, and he wasn't on Harinam, and he wasn't chanting his japa, he could be seen offering respect to sacred plants like tulsi, asvata, or datri. These are 3 auspicious plants. And that was a particular thing he liked to do. He was always offering obeisances to Tulsi Devi and other sacred plants. And knowing that he was the son of a wealthy man, people in town would invite him into their homes and offer him like ladus and sandesh and gulab jamans and other tasty preparations. But Rasikananda would take those preparations and he'd place them around a tulsi plant, and that way he would offer the food to Krishna. Then he and his playmates would circumambulate tulsi, having kirtan, and then he would take that prasadam and he would offer it to the Brahmins, and he would never take anything for himself. Very special child. And again, regarding tulsi, if he found a temple of Krishna or any spot where there was a tulsi plant that was not being properly taken care of, like I said, in unkept condition, he would clean that place by smearing it with cow dung, soil, and water, and make that whole area as clean as Vaikuntha. And the people who weren't taking proper care of that tulsi plant, they would feel ashamed and from that time on follow his example. And as far as his japa was concerned, from the age of 6 years onwards, he was chanting 100,000 names of Krishna every day, 64 rounds a day. Besides school, Harinam, and his special affection for Tulsi Devi, he would chant 64 rounds a day. In fact, I read that he would refuse to accept his mother's cooking until he had completed his chanting in the evening. This is Acharya, one who teaches by example. Now, one time when Rasikananda was a teenager, he was chanting his rounds, his japa, and he entered a forested area. Actually, it's described full of wild animals. And in the middle of that forest, he fell on the ground, and with a heavy sigh, this was on his mind, heavy sigh, he cried out, "Oh my Lord Krishna, why have you forsaken that young gopi after she left her husband and family? She did not consider the good name of her family, and she thinks of you constantly, even in her sleep." Then he said, "How can you expect the cowherd boys and the cows to live without you now that you have left Vrindavan? How will Mother Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj maintain their lives? The Jamuna River is crying for you. Even the trees, the creepers, the birds and animals are crying for you. Why have you left everyone behind in Vrindavan? Why are you so cruel?" These are his thoughts as a teenager. Why have you forsaken these gopis? You've called them to the forest in the middle of the night, and then you tease them and tell them to go home. And you've left Vrindavan, and all the cowherd boys and the cows are missing you, your mother. So these were his thoughts when he was a teenager. Later I read that his father sent his servants to find him, and he was lying unconscious on that forest, in that forest area, and they brought him home. So, moving ahead, in time his parents arranged for his marriage, and though he agreed and was a very responsible householder actually throughout his entire life, in the beginning of his marriage, it's written he spent most of the time studying Srimad Bhagavatam with advanced devotees. And one time he told his father in confidence, quote, "My dear father, I see family, wealth, and prestige as all temporary. Krishna is the only truth. Krishna is true wealth. Krishna's devotees are reality. Krishna's pastimes are reality. Reality is Vrindavan, the gopis, and the son of Nanda Maharaj. Sankirtan is reality. The holy name of Krishna is reality. The Guru and devotion to Lord Krishna are reality. My dear father, this is the essence of the Vedas." A new householder. So many years went by, and one day after finishing his japa meditation in the forest, near a town called Ganashila, at this time he was staying in Orissa, Lord Krishna appeared to Rasikananda with an effulgence that illuminated the entire forest. And as he stood before Rasikananda in a threefold bending form, holding a flute to his lips, Krishna said to him, "My dear Rasika, your spiritual guide is Syamananda Pandit. He is my beloved devotee, and he will deliver all beings by instructing them in pure devotional service to me. By serving him, you will attain my lotus feet. I will be in your heart always." So by serving the Guru, one attains Krishna's lotus feet. Now at that very same moment, Syamananda Pandit, soon to be Rasikananda's spiritual master, he was absorbed in chanting the holy names in the forest of Vrindavan, like thousands of miles away. When Krishna appeared to him as well, and he said to Syamananda Pandit, "My dear Syamananda, Rasikananda is one of my favorite devotees. Please go to Orissa, Utkala it's called, go to Utkala, Orissa, and meet him. Then give him initiation. Together the two of you should preach about pure devotion to me and deliver all the inhabitants of Orissa." So following the Lord's order, Syamananda Pandit left Vrindavan and went to this town, Ganashila in Orissa. And that's about you could say a 3-month journey. And he arrived when Rasikananda was attending a lecture on Srimad Bhagavatam in an assembly of Brahmanas. One Brahmana was giving the class, and Rasikananda was was in the audience. There were many, hundreds of brahmanas there. And when Syamananda Pandit walked into that assembly, it's written, quote, his beautiful golden figure, long arms, smiling face, beautiful eyes, an elephant-like gait caught everyone's attention. In fact, the Bhagavatam speaker, he stopped speaking. And struck by the beauty and the aura of Syamananda Pandit, everyone just turned to where he was coming in the entrance there, and just gazed at him in admiration. And then Syamananda, he saw where Rasikananda was, and he walked a little closer. Then he said to Rasikananda, I am Syamananda Pandit. I have come from Vrindavan on the order of Lord Krishna and the residents of Braja. You are an intimate devotee of Lord Krishna, and I have come here to meet you. And then, one of his most famous lines ever, he said to Rasikananda, in seeing you, I have found the future of Vaishnavism. Wow. In seeing you, he's speaking to his disciple, I have found the future of Vaishnavism. This means a lot to us because we know, again, Mahaprabhu, Panchatattva, all their intimate associates have departed 56 years earlier. And of course, the devotee is always anxious that the movement continues. So in Rasikananda, and this way we can really appreciate Rasikananda for who he is. His guru said, in you, I have found the future of Vaishnavism. And when I think of that, I think of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and how we thought of our Srila Prabhupada. Because I remember being told by one of our sannyasis in the beginning, I forget who it was, I think Yashodananda Maharaj at that time, he said that one time some sannyasis in the Gaudiya Math, they were complaining to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that our Srila Prabhupada at that time of Bhai was getting so much attention from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. We are sannyasis, he's a householder, he's giving a few donations, like that. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur turned to those sannyasis and he said, be quiet. In time, he will do everything. Jai Srila Prabhupada. In time, be quiet. In time, he will do everything. So same mood. Syamananda is saying, in you, my dear Rasikananda, I see the future of Vaishnavism. So the two of them, guru and disciple, spent many days together, chanting the holy names and discussing the deeper subject matters of Krishna consciousness. And then one day Syamananda embraced Rasikananda. What it would be like to be, what is it like to be embraced by the spiritual master? Just like our dear Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. Before he was a sannyasi, he was Gyanasham. And he fearlessly preached Krishna consciousness in Eastern Europe at that time. It was communist, dangerous. Many books. And when Prabhupada met him, he was told that Gyanasham was doing this, and Prabhupada embraced him in gratitude. And later he became Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and we all know the glories of that dear godbrother of ours. So Syamananda embraced Rasikananda, and he said, quote, Krishna will ever remain in your heart. You are the embodiment of the loving image of Krishna, because, it's that light blue color. Along with you, I shall deliver all beings. And then at that moment, he initiated him. And at that particular time, Rasikananda had taken his wife and his family with him. He had, I think, three sons and 3 daughters. So they were all there in that town at the same time. So after initiating Rasikananda, Syamananda Pandit initiated his wife. And he gave her the name Shyamadasi. And in that book, Rasamangala, Rasikamangala, which describes pastimes of Rasikananda, Gopijana Ballabhadas writes about her, about his wife. Quote, I worship Thakurani Shyamadasi, the wife of Rasikananda, and an embodiment of pure devotion. She was a disciple of Syamananda, a devoted wife, and a mother to all. All the world knows that she worshipped Govinda throughout her life. So a very nice glorification of Rasikananda's wife. And as I mentioned, Syamananda also initiated the children of Rasikananda, two of which their initiation is mentioned in that Rasika Mangala book. Quote, I worship Sri Devaki, the daughter of Rasikananda. She was a disciple of Syamananda and the eldest daughter of Rasikananda. I worship Radhananda Thakur, the son of Rasikananda and a favorite disciple of Syamananda, endowed with all auspicious qualities. A very special family, very special family. Now, whenever Rasikananda was with his Guru Maharaj, and his Guru Maharaj was speaking, katha. It's written that Rasika would sit in front of Syamananda Pandit, and he would always cover his feet with a cloth. He would keep his head lowered and remain silent, fixing his eyes just on the lotus feet of his Guru Maharaj in extreme humility. But one day, Rasikananda was attending a lecture by his Guru Maharaj, Syamananda Pandit, on Srimad Bhagavatam, and just for a moment he happened to turn his face away from his Guru Maharaj while listening to him speak. He just turned like that. And his Guru Maharaj, Syamananda Pandit, became furious, and he kicked Rasikananda twice. And Rasikananda fell over and found himself at the lotus feet of his spiritual master. And with tears in his eyes, Rasikananda said, quote, today the result of all my sins have been destroyed by the two kicks of Syamananda Pandit, my spiritual master. Today I have been freed from the bondage of the material world and have attained shelter at the lotus feet of my spiritual master. And seeing Rasikananda's devotion, Syamananda began to shed tears, and he embraced him. So several weeks later, Syamananda Pandit left to go back to Vrindavan, but before leaving he gave Rasikananda an instruction to also come to Vrindavan when he could. So months later, Rasikananda decided to go to Vrindavan, but he wanted to go alone. So he said to his wife, my dear wife, Shyama Dasi, I must go to Braj to see my Guru Maharaj. But you should go and stay at the home of one of your relatives while I'm gone. But she replied, my dear husband, please take me with you. But Rasikananda said something very interesting, and surely for our benefit. He said, quote, the result of visiting millions of tirthas can be attained by serving the Vaishnavas. Remain at home, do service to your family members, and let me go to Braj alone this time. On another occasion, I will take you there. Profound. The result of visiting millions of tirthas can be attained by serving the Vaishnavas. So she agreed. And then he proceeded on to Vrindavan. And the first place he visited was Mathura, and the birthplace of Lord Krishna. And then he toured the 12 forests of Vrindavan. And I was reading when he saw Govardhan Hill, the first glimpse of Govardhan Hill, he fell unconscious. And while in Vrindavan, he associated with many saints, including his spiritual master, Syamananda Pandit. And after a few months, he decided to go back to Orissa, where he was staying at that time. And when he returned home to the place where he was staying with his family, there was some politics going on in town, a lot of politics, a lot of name calling and criticizing, etc. So he and his wife didn't like that. So they decided to leave and go live somewhere else. So despite the fact that the opulence of his father's household, you could say, was equal to that of Kuvera, they left. And all they took were the clothes that they were wearing. And they went to a village, a small village called Kashipur. And they built a very humble home there. And they were living peacefully with the family. But after some time, Syamananda Pandit, their spiritual master, he was on a preaching tour of that particular area. And he came to stay with them for a while in their home. And when he arrived, he had brought a very beautiful deity of Krishna with him. And he came for that one purpose he came was to give them this deity, a very beautiful deity, named Gopi Ballabha Rai. I've seen photos. Gopi Ballabha Rai personally gave that deity to his disciple. And while he was there, it's really interesting, he renamed the town, Kashipur, he renamed it Gopi Ballabhpur, meaning Gopi Ballabha's town, Gopi Ballabhpur. And that town bears the same name even today, 450 years later. So one day on a morning walk, Syamananda Pandit said to Rasikananda, quote, "My dear disciple, I beg a special kind of alms from you. Deliver all living beings and give them the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Bestow pure devotional service upon everyone, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras, Chandalas. Meet all kinds of persons, including kings, queens, their ministers, the subjects, sadhus, children, old people," he said, "and women. Travel from one household to another and induce everyone you meet to chant the holy names of Krishna." So that instruction initiated a new and historic chapter in Rasikananda's life. The acharyas say that he began to preach in earnest. And part of his success came from accepting his own disciples. That was done at that time in history. He had his Guru Maharaj, but he was also allowed to accept his own disciples. And it's written that as a result of this small army of disciples, because he was very attractive, a very good preacher, the whole of Orissa became drowned in the nectarian ocean of Sri Krishna Sankirtan. And I quote one acharya, "Just as iron turns to gold when it comes in contact with the philosopher's stone, Sparshamani, everyone and anyone who came in touch with Rasikananda immediately became a devotee of Krishna. With the rise of the moonlight Rasikananda in Orissa, it became the practice in each house to hold Sankirtan and serve Vaishnavas. Rasika's first 10 disciples were Kalindi Bhakta, Das Yavana, Sham Gopal, Dina Shamanarayan, Ramakrishna, Paramananda, Budara, Gora, Shri Gopal, Gopinath, and Sri Gokula." Just to say their names, isn't it? You get purified. Cheto Darpana Marjana. So, following his spiritual master's instructions, his desire, he traveled widely. One historian has written, this Rasikananda, he was never miserly with anyone. And he always tried his best to satisfy everyone by his very deep explanation of Srimad Bhagavatam. He never disturbed any living entity, and he never committed a sin. I again thought of Prabhupada. One time Prabhupada said, In my lifetime, I did not know what was sinful activity. And I never forgot the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. It's often been noted that whenever he wasn't with his spiritual master, he suffered terribly in separation. As much as you're attached to something, when you don't have it, you feel the loss, or let us say, the separation. So he was so attached to his Guru Maharaj that whenever he was not with him, he suffered terribly in separation. And his spiritual master suffered the separation in the same way. That's love. And so just to show how attached they were to each other, one time Syamananda Pandit sent a messenger with a letter to Rasikananda. I think they were preaching in different parts of Orissa, maybe 300 or 400 kilometers away from each other. So one time Syamananda Pandit, he sent a messenger with a letter for Rasikananda, ordering him to come at once to where he was. And when the messenger arrived with the letter to where Rasikananda was staying, Rasikananda had just sat down to take prasadam. It's written he had taken one mouthful of prasadam and was holding the second piece of prasadam in his hand when the messenger came, and he was asked to read the letter out loud. And as soon as it was being read, and Rasikananda heard his spiritual master wanted to see him, he put down that piece of prasadam. He immediately got up, washed his hands, gathered a few belongings, and walked out the door. Immediately. He didn't go, "Oh, that's very nice." No, put the prasadam, stood up, washed his hands, got it, walked out the door. And within minutes he was on his way alone to walk to see his spiritual master, Syamananda Pandit. I pray for such devotion to Srila Prabhupada. And even though it was night, and it was pitch dark outside and pouring rain, he just walked. And days later, when he reached the village where his spiritual master was, when he arrived, Syamananda lovingly embraced him again, and he said to Rasikananda, "I have heard that you converted the people of Daranda." I couldn't find out where Daranda, maybe it's an old name for a town or a region. "I've heard that you've converted the people of Daranda into Vaishnavas. Now, my dear Rasikananda, you should go to the people who live in the jungle areas. Convert all of them by holding festivals in beautiful places like along the riverbanks." Festivals. So, yeah, he called them all that way just to give them that instruction. "I'm very proud of you. You've delivered the people of that Daranda area. Now go to the jungle. Go to the jungle and preach Krishna consciousness," which he did. So the Acharyas have brought to our attention that Rasikananda's disciples had as much faith in him, Guru Nishta, as Rasikananda had in his spiritual master, Syamananda Pandit. Equal. We can see how much faith Rasikananda had in Syamananda Pandit, but Rasikananda's disciples had the same called Guru Nishta faith in him that he had in Syamananda. And I came across a really nice example of this. One day, Rasikananda was giving a Bhagavatam lecture in the court of a very powerful and famous king. And as the king and his brothers sat listening to the class, the manager of the king's properties came in and stood next to the king. Now, who was the manager of the king's properties? It was a disciple of Rasikananda, a very staunch devotee. His name was Ramakrishna Das. Actually, we heard about him earlier, one of the first 10 disciples. So he's the manager of the king's properties, and he comes in to hear the lecture by his Guru Maharaj, Rasikananda, which the king is listening to. And Ramakrishna, standing very near to the king, he saw that momentarily the king's attention wandered away from Rasikananda's lecture to some social activities that were going on outside, some I think it was some type of sporting activities or something. So when Ramakrishna saw the attention of the king wander away from his Guru Maharaj's lecture to some festivities outside, he said very loudly so everyone could hear, "O king, you're an ignorant fellow. You will give up hearing the nectarian topics of Lord Krishna from the mouth of my spiritual master to watch some frivolous sports outside?" Everyone like, whoa. And then you know what he did? He slapped the king so hard on the face that the king fell over onto the ground and he was unconscious. And when that happened, Rasikananda was giving the lecture. He stopped speaking. And all the king's ministers, they rushed towards Ramakrishna to kill him. But the king quickly came back to consciousness and he stopped the ministers. And he fell at the feet of Ramakrishna, who had shown so much devotion to his guru. And with folded hands, he spoke to his ministers. He's there at the feet of Ramakrishna, but speaking to his ministers. He said, "My dear ministers, I have committed a sin, and for that Ramakrishna Das has punished me." Rasikananda was discussing topics of Lord Krishna, but I allowed my attention to wander elsewhere. It is the verdict of all scriptures that any topics other than those concerning Lord Krishna are like poison. Poison. That person who allows his attention to wander away from the topics of Krishna is a sinner. I have been rightly punished by Ramakrishna. My dear ministers, he has saved me and shown proof of his affection for me, unquote. Then the king, in front of everybody, embraced Ramakrishna, who had slapped him so hard. And embracing him, he began to weep. Then he took Ramakrishna's hand and he said, "Your hand must hurt after slapping my hard body." So then Rasikananda began the class again. And the king had Ramakrishna sit next to him on the throne as they continued to hear the glories of Lord Krishna. A nice example of how much faith his disciples had in him, like he had in his Guru Maharaj, Guru Nishta. The best of all qualities. So, not all the kings that Rasikananda encountered in his preaching were like that king. In one kingdom he passed through, there was a very envious, demoniac king. And it's described when he heard that Rasikananda and his followers were coming through his area. They were in a particular town. He ordered his ministers to go and get his war elephant. War elephant. These elephants are trained to fight in battle. They're made to be very angry. They're given certain types of intoxicants, and they go into the battle. Many months ago, we talked about these war elephants. So the most ferocious of his war elephants, he told his ministers, "You go find where Rasikananda is, which town he's in, and you send this war elephant to kill him." So they did that. And one day Rasikananda was walking through a town with his followers, having Harinam, Kirtan. And the ministers, they brought the elephant and put him in front of the Kirtan party, maybe 100 meters ahead of the Kirtan party. And that mad elephant, that war elephant, who was foaming at the mouth, his eyes were red, his tusks were there ready to kill, and he started charging at Rasikananda. It's a famous pastime. But as the elephant got closer, it's said that he became mesmerized by Rasikananda's auspicious features and his beautiful form. And he slowed down, came to a stop. And Rasikananda looked in the elephant's eyes and he said, quote, "O mad elephant, you listen to me. Worship Krishna and serve his devotees. Why are you engaged in these wicked deeds? Without knowledge of Krishna, All efforts are futile. Chant the name of Krishna, meditate on Krishna, and dedicate yourself to the worship of his lotus feet. Now he's speaking to a beast. But just so we can appreciate the words of such a devotee of that caliber, those words went straight to the heart of the elephant, and he became fully enlightened, fully spiritually enlightened. And that elephant fell at Rasika's lotus feet and began weeping, actually. And Rasikananda put one hand on the head of the elephant, and then he spoke the 16-word Hare Krishna Maha Mantra into his right ear. He initiated the elephant. And upon receiving the holy name, the elephant stood up very quickly and again fell prostrate at Rasikananda's lotus feet. Then Rasikananda announced to everyone who was like astounded with seeing this mercy, incredible mercy going on, he told the elephant, "From now on you shall be known as Gopal Das." Full initiation. Whispered the mantra in his right ear, accepted him as a disciple, and gave him a name, Gopal Das. And when he received his name, it's written that the elephant, he offered obeisances 100 times at the feet of Rasikananda. And then he spent some time there, and gradually he wandered off into the forest. And everyone who had witnessed this miracle thought, quote, Rasikananda not only tamed the mad elephant, but he gave him spiritual initiation. And that demoniac king who had sent the war elephant, he'd been told of what had happened, so he left his palace and he came running and he fell at Rasikananda's lotus feet, and with folded hands he said, "Sir, I was unable to appreciate your transcendental position, and thus I ordered the elephant to kill you. Please forgive me." And to the surprise of everyone, Rasikananda forgave him. Such is a Vaishnava. But that wasn't the last that anyone saw of Gopal Das. The next year, when Rasikananda was passing through that same area, he was giving a lecture to several thousand people in a pandal, an outside program, near the same forested area. And all of a sudden, the elephant, Gopal Das, appeared, somehow knowing his Guru Maharaj was there. And he slowly left the forest, and he came to where the pandal was. But, when everyone saw an elephant coming, they all panicked and everyone ran away. And but eyewitnesses have said that the elephant came and he fell at Rasikananda's lotus feet, and again washed those feet with his tears. And because everyone had left, Rasikananda spent the next few hours narrating the glories of the Gita and the Bhagavatam and other scriptures to Gopal Das, the elephant. Everyone left, so he started giving class to the elephant, to Gopal Das, the Gita, the Bhagavatam, etc. And then it's written, quote, receiving this special knowledge, Gopal Das bowed at his Guru's lotus feet and returned to the forest filled with intentions of visiting holy places of pilgrimage. The lecture had inspired him to visit holy places of pilgrimage. Now, several weeks later, Rasikananda and some of his disciples, they entered that same forest to, while they were chanting their japa, their 64 rounds. But somehow, in the ecstasy of their chanting, they lost their sense of direction. And they just started wandering around, and not knowing where they were. They were lost. And when it started to rain, they all sat down under a big banyan tree. And because of the torrential rain, they were forced to stay there with no prasadam all day. There's nothing to eat. So later on in the afternoon, inspired by Krishna within his heart, Gopal Das, the elephant, came to that place because that was where he lived, in that forest. And understanding that his Guru Maharaj, Rasikananda, was fasting, he ran like the wind to the home of a forest dweller and collected rice from him. The elephant ran like the wind to the home of a forest dweller and collected rice for him. Then returning to Rasikananda, Gopal Das offered that rice at Rasikananda's lotus feet. So Rasikananda then placed his hand again on the elephant's head and blessed him by saying, "My dear disciple, please render sincere service to the devotees of the Lord and never blaspheme them. Also, again, I want to encourage you to visit holy places of pilgrimage." He knew the heart of his disciple. So after this, getting a direct instruction from his Guru Maharaj, it's said in many places that the people would often see the elephant visiting places associated with Krishna's pastimes, as well as those places where Brahmanas and Vaishnavas lived. He traveled everywhere, visiting places of Krishna had his pastimes. And while doing so, people would hear the elephant chanting the names of Krishna like a devout Vaishnava. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And one last note on that pastime. During the elephant's travels to the places of Krishna's pastimes, if any person uttered the name Rasikananda, Gopal Das would come and bow down to them. And wherever he went, he happily rendered service to the devotees by collecting whatever they required. Now, months later, in another town, Gopal Das suddenly appeared at a large festival that Rasikananda was attending. And again, seeing him, all the people left. They were at a panic. They fled away. And he came and offered obeisances to his Guru Maharaj. And then Guru Maharaj again placed his hand as a blessing on the elephant's head and said, Gopal Das, this time people are really afraid of you, so you can come back in the evening to listen to kirtan. Only come back in the evening. So hearing this, Gopal Das every evening came to see his Guru Maharaj and hear him chanting the holy names of Krishna. So many wonderful pastimes. I wish that they had been chronicled every day from cradle to the grave of that devotee. We're just getting like the tip of the iceberg here. So one year at Jagannath Puri, just before the annual Ratha Yatra, Lord Jagannath appeared in a dream to the head priest one night, and he said, quote, "Rasikananda is one of my favorite devotees." This is Jagannath. "I want to see him. Go tell the king to send a messenger to bring him to me. I'm sending him my own cloth so that he will come to see me during the Ratha Yatra festival." Of course, Jagannath Puri is in Orissa, and that's one of the main places that Rasikananda was preaching. So when the king received the priest's message, he sent 2 brahmanas with Lord Jagannath's cloth to Rasikananda, who was staying several hundred miles away. And some hours before the messengers arrived, Rasikananda was sitting and chanting his japa with his disciples, when suddenly he heard an Akashvani. I love these Akashvanis. I want to hear Akashvani, please. He heard an Akashvani, a voice from the sky, say, "Come, see me soon." Rasikananda heard that. "Come, see me soon." So Rasikananda, he's the only one who heard it. He turned to his disciples and said, "I have received an order from Lord Jagannath to observe the Rath Yatra festival. And just then the two messengers arrived and said, quote, O Rasikananda, how can we describe your glories? Lord Jagannath has given his own cloth to you. He, Jagannath, held the hand of the priest in a dream and told him that you're one of his favorite devotees and he wishes to see you. He also told the king that you should come at the time of Rath Yatra. This is Lord Jagannath's cloth, and here is the king's humble letter requesting you to come and see Jagat Bandhu, Jagannath, at the time of Rath Yatra. Our priest had this dream, and he instructed the king that you should arrange, that the king should arrange for you to come to Jagannath Puri in time for the Rath Yatra. So the next morning, Rasikananda and his disciples, they started for Jagannath Puri. They got the order from the Lord. And on the way, they stopped at a village called Muktapura for the night, Muktapura. Unfortunately, the head man of that village approached them as they were entering the village, and he said very roughly, "We cannot accommodate wicked wretches like you, so-called devotees of the Lord. While you're in this town, you have to stay under the trees. We don't have any accommodation for you." So when Rasikananda heard this, he said to that village chief, "Sir, you have enjoyed so many years of your life living in these fine houses, yet you cannot accommodate the sadhus. What is the use of your houses?" Then he closed his eyes. And suddenly, a fierce wind began to blow. A powerful wind, and it caused friction, different elements in the town, and a fire started. And soon all the houses of the people caught on fire. And as the local people ran trying to save their valuables, some fell at the feet of Rasikananda, begging him, "Oh Prabhu, please save us." And realizing the seriousness of his offense, the head of the village, he also came. And he fell down and he grabbed the lotus feet of Rasikananda, put them to his heart. He said, "Prabhu, surely I'm a wicked person and dared to ignore your request. Please save us." So seeing this remorse, Rasikananda looked at him and very mercifully, very sweetly, he said, "All right." Then he looked up to the sky and he said, "Agni Dev, do not give any more trouble to this miserable town. Forgive them and stop burning their homes." And then it's described that being thus ordered by Rasikananda, Agni immediately extinguished the fire. And seeing the power of Rasikananda, all the villagers were astonished. And I read that eventually they all became his followers. Who would not after seeing such a miracle? So the next day was Rath Yatra in Puri. And upon waking that morning, Rasikananda and his disciples hurried to the festival, which was it was only a short distance away by this time. But by that time, Jagannath, Balaram, and Lady Subhadra had boarded their chariots, it's described. And at the blowing of a conch, the priests and the pilgrims very enthusiastically began pulling the chariot's ropes. But to everyone's surprise, chariots wouldn't move. So the king of Puri, he had elephants brought in, and the elephants were, tied to the chariot, and but even elephants couldn't move the chariots. So then Lord Jagannath spoke to the head priest. Previously had a dream, must be an advanced soul. Lord Jagannath, spoke to the head priest, saying, "My dear priest, my devotee Rasikananda is now on his way here. Until he reaches here, my chariot will not move. Please do not waste your time trying to move it. When Rasikananda comes, he will move it very easily. Tell this to the king. So the head priest ran over to the king, and the king said, oh, okay. And the king immediately set out on foot to meet Rasikananda and his disciples as they were coming into Puri. They weren't that far away. Very nice. The king goes to meet the sadhu. Then he brought Rasikananda and his disciples to where the chariots were. And when he came, Rasikananda offered the deities, Jagannath, Subhadra and Balaram, very valuable jewels, nice silk cloth, and various ornaments. And then he placed his head behind Lord Jagannath's chariot, and he began walking. The chariot moved. But it's written, it didn't just move. It moved just like the wind. I love that. The chariot moved, but it didn't just move. It moved just like the wind. As did the other chariots. Such is the power of a pure devotee like Rasikananda. I'm so grateful to be able to share all this knowledge with all of you. One day we hope we can meet him. So then one day, in the year 1690, as Rasikananda was reading Shastra, Krishna appeared before him, his complexion like a monsoon cloud, and holding a flute. And he said to Rasikananda, "My dear Rasikananda, it is now time for you to leave this world." So the next morning, Rasikananda gathered the disciples that were with him, and he shared with them the Lord's order. It must have been heartbreaking for those disciples who had so much Guru Nishta. He said to them, quote, "I have to carry out Krishna's order to leave this world. I cannot stay any longer in this ominous age of Kali. As Kali Yuga progresses, the Yavanas, the fallen people, will reign in Bharat Bhumi. People will give up religious principles. I have been the Lord's sincere servant for a long time. My childhood was passed in the worship of Krishna. I traveled through forest after forest in search of Krishna with tears in my eyes. Although I have a family, I was never entangled in home life. My time was spent solely in the service of Guru and Krishna and the sadhus, and I never cared for eating, sleeping, and other pleasures. Fortunately, my spiritual master, Syamananda Pandit, came to me and initiated me into the Hare Krishna mantra. And I served the residents of Braj and practiced all the rules of scripture concerning religion and devotion. With Syamananda, I preached the religion of Sankirtan for 40 years. With Syamananda, I preached the religion of Sankirtan for 40 years. Then a few days later, on the Falguna Shukla Pratipat, the day after Shiva Chaturdashi, sensing his imminent departure, Rasikananda had his disciples carry him to the village of Remuna. And I think some of you have been to Remuna. It's before Jagannath Puri. And they took him to the temple of Kiratora Gopinath, famous temple. And they all, carrying their Guru Maharaj, with a roaring kirtan, all these disciples, they entered into the temple with a roaring kirtan. And Rasikananda came forward, and while touching the feet of Kiratora Gopinath, he left this world. He was 69 years of age. And as he departed, touching the lotus feet of that amazing deity, the very beautiful deity, as he departed, 8 of his disciples who were doing the kirtan, leading the kirtan, they all dropped their mridungas and their kartals, and they dropped and left their bodies too. As he left, 8 of his disciples who were doing kirtan, they dropped their mridungas, they dropped their kartals, and they left their bodies. They couldn't bear to be without him. So Rasikananda's sacred samadhi is there in the Kiratora Gopinath temple, as well as the samadhis of those 8 disciples who left with him and went with him wherever he went. I'm sure back to Goloka Vrindavan. Hare Krishna. So I thought the most appropriate way to conclude today's lecture would be to hear directly from Rasikananda himself. But how do we do that? How do we hear directly from he himself? Well, please remember that it was he who wrote the Syamananda Shatakam, the 100 verses glorifying his spiritual master, Syamananda Pandit. So now we'll hear from the heart of this great devotee, Rasikananda, glorifying his Guru Maharaj. In this way we will conclude, glorifying Syamananda Pandit. Few verses. I think they're some of the last verses of the Syamananda Shataka. To Sri Syamananda, whose bodily hairs stood erect, whose limbs trembled, and who was plunged into sweet nectar as he meditated on the pastime where beautiful, enchanting, playfully smiling, gloriously dressed and decorated Sri Radha and her friends playfully splashed water on Lord Krishna as they played in the Jamuna, and where Lord Krishna became momentarily stunned as the Kanchana birds of Sri Radha's eyes happily danced. To Sri Syamananda, my spiritual master, who shed a river of tears as he happily described the pastime where, as they sat amongst the gopis in a flower-filled forest grove by the glorious Jamuna's bank, a grove filled with humming bees and cooing birds, Radha and Krishna, pretending to look at the many flowers, gazed at the glorious moons of each other's faces. To my spiritual master, Sri Syamananda, who, hearing of Lord Krishna's sweet rasa dance festival with the gopis, became filled with ecstatic love, began to dance, and then fell unconscious as he danced, and who then manifested the ecstatic symptoms of trembling, being stunned, speaking words in a choked voice, perspiring, weeping, becoming pale, and having a body with hair standing erect, and who was at every moment overcome with ecstatic love, and who taught others also how to become overcome with ecstatic love. To that personality, my spiritual master, Sri Syamananda, I offer my respectful obeisances again and again and again. Wow. Words from the heart of Rasikananda. Perfect way to finish this class on that illustrious personalities. Shri Rasikananda ki jai, Syamananda Pandit ki jai, Gopal the elephant ki jai. Back home, back to Godhead ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Thank you everyone. We'll take a few days now and we'll find either another glorious personality or another place which we haven't described yet in Vrindavan. We were describing Vrindavan for so many months, and then somehow we began describing the glorious personalities who live there, because Only by their mercy can we actually understand Sri Vrindavan Dham. So it's been a wonderful journey the last few weeks, describing the glories of all these wonderful acharyas. Let's see if we can find a couple more. Otherwise, back to Vrindavan pastimes. Thank you. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Shri Rasikananda ki, Syamananda Pandit ki, Gopal the elephant ki, Shri Ravavahari ki, Shri Goloka Vrindavan Dham ki, Gopremanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Sham. Thank you, Rasikananda.